Alright guys, Willem here, back with a new video, and in this video, I'm back with another of my top 10 character videos. I've already done a top 10 pre-merge character video, and in the future I plan on doing a top 10 characters of all time for Survivor US, though here, due to the number of returning players on my top 10 characters of all time list, I decided to make a list of top 10 one-time characters. Obviously, characters from the show that only played one time, which was a surprisingly difficult list to put together. While I did feel like the top of this list was pretty solidified in my mind, I did feel like a lot of the bottom placements on this list were very interchangeable and did make the overall list here a difficult one to put together just because of how many people were kind of fighting for the same spots. Now I should clarify, when I talk about my top characters of all time, I am largely talking about the entertainment value that these people bring, not anything based around their gameplay. Largely trying to strip that aspect of their presence on the show out, instead insist them on how entertaining they are on the show. But obviously, as with any list like this, I do have a number of honorable mentions, and let's just run through them real quick. Going through them in chronological order of when they first played. First one of note here comes from Survivor Thailand, where I did very much consider Clay Jordan, who is a character that I've always found darkly humorous, and while there are definitely some icky moments from him across his season, I feel like his one-liners were pretty humorous at points, though again, not quite enough to make the top 10. Also from Vanuatu, I did consider Twyla, who is a really entertaining presence on the show, one that would constantly get into arguments and was deeply in consideration, though didn't make the cut. Also to consider Rory from Vanuatu, though straight up, it was mostly just because I have the line, "I'm a grown-ass man," stuck in my head constantly, though. Still a really fun character, but one that didn't quite make the list. From Palau, I did consider Ian, though straight up, if Ian did make the list, it would be more so based around his story arc, not necessarily him as an actual character, which I do think I would later end up making its own separate video as like a top 10 story arc video, which is why Ian didn't make the cut here. Next up from Guatemala, I did consider Gary Hogaboom. Always found this storyline about him lying about being Gary Hawkins to be a really humorous one, though again, not quite enough to make top 10. From Survivor Fiji, I did end up considering Dreams, though again, Dreams is kind of in line with Ian as he's more notable story arcs than they are as individual characters. I did then consider Crystal from Gabon, who obviously had some great voting confessionals, though I did feel like for a list like this, it wasn't quite enough to crack the top 10. Next up from Samoa, I did consider Shambo, who I always found to be a really fun presence, her essentially being this like female version of Coach to a degree, though her also having this like early Kathy Vavrick O'Brien storyline to her as well, and she is very entertaining on the show, though also barely did not make the top 10. Next up from Nicaragua, I surprisingly did not put Marty on the list, which was a shock to me considering Marty has always been someone that I know as one of my favorite all-time characters, and shockingly, I ended up putting someone that I put below him in a previous video on the actual top 10. But I think the main reason for that is because like with Marty, I think it's very difficult to think of individual character moments that truly stand out. I mean, I think Marty is just someone that, considering his role on Nicaragua and him being like one of the more openly strategic players on that cast, I think it ended up leading to him playing a really interesting role on that season, but I think it's a role that we've kind of seen from other players across Survivor history, to where I feel like it's not entirely unique, with also kind of a lack of individual character moments outside of his lying to Fabio about being a Grand Master. I do feel like it just didn't really feel like enough to be top 10. Also, I did consider Jim Rice, who is kind of in the same ballpark as Marty. Again, similar style of characters, similar style of approaches to the game, but also did not make the top 10. Also, I did consider Rodney, who did have some humorous moments across Worlds Apart, though also did come off as kind of unlikable at points. That was enough to kind of not make the top 10. Did also very much consider Chris Noble, which there was a point where Chris Noble was in my top 10. Though I feel like the issue with Chris here is, one, I feel like most of his character stuff comes from his final episode, but also like he kind of had this Rory effect to him as well, where he's largely someone I considered because literally of just his line of "I'm too suave," which has been something that always gets stuck in my head as well. But again, like I feel like there definitely is an argument for him making the list, but I just didn't end up putting him on. Next up from David versus Goliath, I did consider Mike White, who I thought was pretty fun on the season. I mean, he obviously has a good story arc, but even beyond that, he had these funny moments during the reward where he's just sipping on wine in the background, though again, I didn't feel like it was enough to crack top 10. Also, I did end up considering Davey, who I think would have been a really fun pick to be on the list here as well. Though again, it's another one that outside of his gloating after the John Hennigan blindside, I can't really think of many individual Davey moments that really stand out. So again, he didn't make the list. From 39, I did end up considering Nora, who is again kind of in a similar ballpark of her being this like really massive character. The one that I can't really think of that many individual character moments, I guess outside of her at Final Tribal getting mocked for comparing things to relationships constantly. But again, she was definitely very close to making the list. I actually feel like there's a certain person on the actual list that kind of took her spot, but really again, Nora did not make the cut. And finally from 42, a couple other considerations. I did consider Marianne, who I was surprised did not make the list here. Again, in my initial draft, she was on the list. However, the reason I knocked her off was because it's one of these situations where I don't feel like the edit properly displayed her character as much as I would have wanted it to, where she clearly is a massive character. And I feel like post-show, I've definitely gotten a lot more of her character than I did on the show, where I feel like on the show, again, there are individual moments at points where we have her talking about her crush on Zach and her constantly saying the phrase. Though I feel like outside that, by the end of the game, it kind of ended up being more so based around her gameplay and her story that I kind of took away a bit from her character in my mind. So again, she didn't make the list. And also I did very much consider Omar, who I thought played a very strong villain on 42, kind of had these very cutting confessionals that were fun to see, though again, not quite enough to make the top 10. Well, those are all my honorable mentions. Now let's get into the actual top 10. And the top 10 characters who have played one time. Starting off at number 10, I do have the person I mentioned earlier, the person who was actually below Marty in a previous video, my favorite characters from every season video, though this time I ended up putting her above him, and that person is NAONKA from Survivor Nicaragua, who, again, is one of these people that, again, was kind of fighting for this last spot. It could have definitely been someone like a Shambo, could have been a Chris Noble, could have been Marianne or Nora, though I ended up going NAONKA here simply because I really just loved how much of a villain she was on the show. While she definitely did come off as unlikable at points, I do feel like, especially in the modern day where we'd get very few villains on Survivor, she's one that just like really stands out for her massive over-the-topness across the season. And again, to be fair, part of that is because of her quitting the game and they're wanting to demonize her on the show, but I feel like that kind of ended up making her a more interesting character in my mind, and mixing that up again, like the fact that she has these notable moments of her literally tackling Kelly Bruno and having this confessional pulling her leg off, and her really humorous moment of her deciding to not even give up her reward even though she was planning on quitting, and her feud with Fabio. Again, there are a decent chunk of notable character moments to where for me she ended up qualifying for a list here at number 10. Now number 9, and at number 9 is kind of starting 3 characters in a row here that I feel like are more notable for the overall persona that they give off than they are for individual character moments. So at number 9, we're starting it off with one of the more iconic characters in recent years, that being Christian from David vs. Goliath, who largely comes off as this very unique character. Obviously, this one that comes off very intelligent, one that is almost always talking in this very intellectual way, as if he's teaching you something, or as if he is utilizing this wealth of information that he has in his head. And through that leads to this really interesting arc across the season of him being underestimated initially, though he ends up being one of the season's bigger players. Though obviously for this list, again, it is more so his overall demeanor that makes him one of the better characters here, where he just feels like an entirely unique character, one that we haven't really seen since, and that we probably won't ever see again. And really moving even beyond that, obviously he does have the fun character moment of the immunity challenge where he's against Alec and he constantly talks throughout the entire time to annoy people, and again, that's all really fun as well. I feel like Christian just feels like an all-time great character just due to how unique he is and how fun of a presence he is on the show, and that is why he's here number 9. At number 8, we're moving on to the most recent season to pull from here. At number 8 from Survivor 44, I do have CAROLYN. Now, I did debate a bit with CAROLYN here, as I feel like CAROLYN's one of these people that I struggle thinking of an individual character moment for CAROLYN. However, she's just such an interesting presence on the show. Again, similar to Christian, her overall demeanor is one that ends up being really interesting. Her really frantic energy while talking, plus her constant screams for seemingly no reason, ends up just being infinitely entertaining to me. And really, I think if there is a fantastic character moment from CAROLYN, it is her challenge performance, which was terrible, though was just really funny to see. It was really funny to see her just scream every time she would fail at something during a challenge, and mixing that in for actual intelligence in the game and how she was able to articulate her game and how underestimated she was. I do feel like it makes her feel like this evolution of Nora, where while she still gets the wacky, zany content that Nora got, I feel like Carolyn was able to do so in a way that would also allow her to become such a massive character for the entire season, not just when her character moments were necessary for the show, and through that it made her feel like a bigger character on the season. While with something like Nora on IOI, she largely comes off as a secondary character in my mind there, while Carolyn's obviously one of the main characters of 44, and I kind of feel like that was the main decision maker for me and why she's here at number 8. At number 7, sticking with Survivor 44, I do also have Jam Jam on this list. Now, Jam Jam's another one, and kind of like the final one on this list that is more so here just for his overall demeanor and individual character moments. And again, Jam Jam's another one that I'm kind of struggling with thinking of an individual character moment for him. Again, there are these moments of like he makes these jokes around camp that are pretty humorous, of him saying, if you think it's going to be awkward tonight, it is. And just jokes like that do end up coming off very humorous, though really aren't big moments in the grand scheme of things. Though I do think he is kind of a master at making these smaller moments really entertaining. Like, it is just fun to listen to Jam Jam talk about things, and the amount of energy that he brings to almost anything is just super entertaining. His confessional about wanting to poop in the ocean is still just really hilarious, and Jam Jam to me is just an all-time great character, largely because of just who he is as a person, more than anything that he actually does on the season, which I think makes his placement on this list even more impressive. Is that, again, I don't think he has nearly as great of character moments as most other people on this list, but he is just infinitely entertaining in my mind, and because that he's here number 7. Now number 6, we're moving on to a character that I've talked about this one quite a bit recently, and I feel like this is one that I talked about how my appreciation for this character went up through watching some episodes more recently, and that character is Tarzan from Survivor 1 World, who is obviously just a really humorous figure on the show, one that speaks in a really entertaining way, similar to Christian, and him using these bigger words and talking in this over-the-top manner, though also created a lot of conflict on his season. Unlike Christian, who is a more happy-go-lucky presence that everyone liked, Tarzan got into arguments with people. Obviously, he got into a massive argument with Jonas for seemingly no reason. He had the "it's not poop, it's dirt" moment with Chelsea that was really humorous. He has him completely forgetting the names of a lot of the players, and Colton having to continuously remind him of people's names. We have him not spending money at the auction so I could buy new shocks for his car. And again, there's just so many like little funny moments with Tarzan, to where when mixing that with the fact that the merge episode itself is this fantastic character piece for Tarzan, it really ends up elevating him on the list here to be here number 6. Now number 5 is another character that was not particularly high in this list when I initially created this concept. However, the more and more I thought about it, the more and more it would bother me to not have him pretty high here. And at number 5, I do have Chris Doherty from Vanuatu, who is kind of like a mix of a couple characters we've already talked about. I do think he kind of fits into like the mold of these characters who are more so fun just because of his overall persona than anything, of him having this like really over the top way of talking in confessionals. They end up putting so much gravitas into anything he says that ends up being really humorous, with him really being a master at bullshitting, as we see in his final tribal, which is really funny, which that's something that definitely elevates him. However, I also feel like something that I personally always remember from Chris is how he has some of my favorite immunity win celebrations in the history of the show to me, both at the final 3 and final 4. At the final 3, when he wins final immunity, he seemingly doesn't know how to celebrate and awkwardly just paces around until he just screams awkwardly and throws his hat, which is humorous. Even his winner celebration is really funny, where he just yells "F yeah" and jumps up. I've always personally loved his final 4 immunity win, which is him continuously yelling out "I got it, I got it, I got it, I got it," and yelling out "yeah" a billion times. I personally always love Chris Doherty's winner reactions, but when mixing that in with the fact that his confessionals are just really funny, and his final tribal and him trying to smooth the jury is also a really humorous character moment to me, that really elevates him to be here at number 5. Now number 4, we're moving on to really the top tier of the list for me. Again, this top 4 was definitively top 4. I feel like these are the 4 characters that instantly came to my mind and instantly stuck to the top of the list. However, at number 4, I'm starting off this tier with a character that I've notably talked about as one of the all-time great characters, and that is Dan Foley from Worlds Apart, who, again, I know people don't like Dan Foley. However, I stick by the fact that Dan Foley is one of the greatest characters of all time. Not because he's a likable character, but kind of because he is unlikable. Because he is so ridiculously over the top that I just can't take him seriously. And because of that, everything that he does that is supposedly unlikable then turns to it just being funny because it's Dan Foley. I mean, yes, there is ickiness around how Dan dismisses Shireen's abusive childhood and talks about how he's similar because he was adopted, which is, again, icky on paper, but it's also just so funny that he actually believes that that's the case. We have Dan is wrong again, which is still one of my all-time favorite moments in the history of the show, which is just so funny every time I see it. We have how over the top he is, not just in Confessional, but just in general, where he's probably one of the biggest hams to ever be on the show. I mean, his talk about how he's a fat guy and how the bamboo won't stay is still really funny to me as well. His final tribal speech is really funny, and how he goes to blast Mike only for Mike to give a basic apology, and Dan then talks about how it's the best thing he's ever heard. Like, really, again, there's just so many funny Dan Foley moments across this season to where I get why people don't like him. However, again, I just can't take him seriously, and when you look at him from a more humorous lens, just everything he does on this season is just so ridiculous, and that's why he's here at number 4. Now, number 3, we're moving on to, again, another one of these all-time great characters, one that instantly came to mind. At number 3, I do have Shane Powers from Survivor Panama, who, again, was just so obvious to put on the list here. I mean, Shane's just the type of character that you very rarely ever see, and is one that just brought so many entertaining moments to the show. Constantly getting into fights with numerous people on the cast, having his fake BlackBerry that ends up being a funny little moment there. He has everything revolving around Bruce's medevac, where he's helping the doctors around while being completely nude. He has this weird relationship with Courtney that ends up leading to a lot of fun bantering, including the "I'm gonna kill you in your shitty little apartment," which is still one of my all-time favorite moments. I mean, his vote off is very notable to me, and how he talks about how he's gonna be eating a cheeseburger in 1 minute. And just, again, overall, Shane Powers, incredible character, one that very much stands out here and is easily at number 3. Now, number 2, probably the number 1 character that came to my mind when I initially created this list. Probably the person I expected to be at the very top. However, there's a certain other character that I think just is far and away number 1 that had to be number 1 when I really thought about it. But at number 2, I did end up going with Judd from Guatemala, who I've always loved Judd as a character. I mean, Judd is just incredible TV. Again, another one of these like really argumentative figures at camp, one that's willing to get into fights with almost anybody, especially if they call him out first, but also just really brings so much entertainment to the season of Guatemala, one that would have probably been a lot more dull if it was not for him being around, where you got the ADD tribal, one of my favorite tribals in the history of the show, especially one not for gameplay reasons, where his spiel about sportsmanship and being extremely hypocritical in itself there is really funny. Also, him just literally getting up and saying you have ADD is always really humorous as well. We obviously have the idol hunt of it all, and him telling people that it's definitely in the ground, only for him to be caught looking up in trees, and that's really humorous. We have him stealing the beers and getting upset at people accusing him of stealing the beers, only for him to admit that he stole the beers in confessional. We have his vote out where he says, I hope you're going to be eaten by crocodiles, and calls them scumbags. And yet there's just so many fun little moments across this season from Judd. Truly an elite character of all time, and that is why he's here number 2. Now, number 1, the best one-time character in the history of Survivor, which again is someone that didn't initially come to my mind when creating a concept for this video, but when actually think about it, it's super obvious. At number 1, I do have Angelina from David vs. Goliath, and I think Angelina is probably the definitive one-time character, one that has just so many iconic character moments all over the course of just one season, where so many of her moments have really reached the lexicon of Survivor and being these all-time great character moments for the show. Again, you have her begging for Natalie's jacket on her way way out, which is really funny. You have her doing the rice negotiation and continuously taking credit for it. You have her ladder, where she exaggerates how high it was and claims that she could have died while looking for her idol. We have her planting a fake idol for Allison to find, only for Allison to know it's fake right away, which is funny. We have her blow up with Elizabeth, which was really sloppy play from Angelina, though it did lead to a lot of fun bantering at Tribal, along the fact that we get her begging for Dan's idol, which is a little humorous moment as well. And again, I just feel like Angelina has these character moments that really reach the lexicon of Survivor. The rice negotiation, the Allie's jacket of it all, the ladder, these things that really make it feel like she has this career's worth of character moments all over the course of just one season. To where, for me, I feel like she is the one that for sure stood out the most of the bunch, the one that feels like the most iconic of the one-time characters, and because that, for me, she is here number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my top 10 one-time characters for Survivor US. Now, again, moving forward, I will be doing a top 10 characters of all time video at some point down the road, which will kind of conclude this mini series of top 10s I've been doing. But obviously outside that, just expect more of the same style content of rankings, casting videos, what ifs at some point down the road. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.